The night a king chose love over power, every enemy he had smiled, because they thought he had just destroyed himself. The first time I saw Luca Moretti betray the men who helped build his empire, I thought I was watching a mistake. Looking back now, I realize I was watching a miracle. The conference room overlooked Manhattan from 60 floors up. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a painting made of steel, glass, and ambition. It was nearly midnight, and the skyline glittered beneath a cold November rain. I stood near the back wall holding a tablet against my chest, trying to stay invisible. That was easy enough. People rarely noticed nurses, especially not in rooms like this. Especially not when the room was filled with men whose names carried enough influence to move markets, close businesses, and open doors that stayed locked for everyone else. My shift at St. Vincent Medical Center had ended 3 hours earlier, but Luca's son had spiked a fever again. I had stayed to monitor him at the penthouse apartment above the tower. The fever broke around 10. I should have gone home. Instead, Luca's head of security asked me to remain upstairs until the family physician arrived in the morning. So there I was, exhausted, running on stale coffee and 4 hours of sleep. Standing in the shadows while the most powerful men in New York argued around a polished black table. Nobody acknowledged me. Nobody wanted to. Their attention was fixed on Luca. He sat at the far end beneath a chandelier that cast soft gold light across his face. 34 years old. Dark suit. Dark hair. Calm eyes that rarely revealed what he was thinking. Most people looked powerful because they demanded attention. Luca was different. He looked powerful because he never needed to ask for it. One of the older men slammed a folder onto the table. The sharp sound echoed through the room. "You know what they're asking," he said. "This isn't complicated." Silence followed. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Somewhere far below, traffic crawled through wet streets. Luca folded his hands together. "I understand exactly what they're asking." Another man leaned forward. "Then make the smart decision." The room grew still. Unnaturally still. The kind of silence that made even breathing feel too loud. I didn't understand the full conversation. I wasn't supposed to. But I understood enough. They wanted Luca to remove something from his life. Someone. And for the first time all evening, his eyes shifted. Just slightly. Toward the doorway behind me. Toward the private elevator that led upstairs. Toward the place where his son was sleeping safely in bed. Then he spoke. Quietly. No, the reaction was immediate. Not anger. Not shouting. Something worse. Disappointment. The kind that comes when people realize they can no longer control someone. "Think carefully," the older man warned. "If you do this, everything changes." Luca rose slowly from his chair. The city lights reflected behind him like a crown made of stars. "I know. You could lose everything." His expression never changed. "Then I lose everything." My heart stumbled. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. For several long seconds, all I could hear was the rain. Then Luca buttoned his jacket and walked toward the door. Toward me. Toward whatever future waited beyond that room. As he passed, his eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. Calm. Certain. Unafraid. And that was the moment I realized something impossible. The most powerful man in New York had already made his choice. The empire was no longer the thing he was trying to protect. 8 months earlier, my shift was supposed to end at 11 o'clock. Instead, I was still standing under fluorescent lights at nearly midnight, finishing charts while the emergency department hummed around me. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air. Monitors beeped steadily. Somewhere down the hall, a television played a late-night weather report nobody was watching. My feet hurt. My shoulders ached. I had worked 6 consecutive days, and all I wanted was my apartment, a hot shower, and 6 uninterrupted hours of sleep. Life did not seem interested in granting any of those things. I took a sip of coffee that had gone cold hours ago and immediately regretted it. Across the nurse's station, Dr. Reynolds rubbed his eyes and muttered something about retirement. I laughed. Quietly. At 27, I already understood the feeling. That was when the ambulance doors burst open. Everything changed in seconds. Paramedics rushed through carrying a small boy on a stretcher. He could not have been older than 7. His face was pale. His breathing was uneven. The urgency in the room shifted instantly. Conversations stopped. Chairs moved. People began working before instructions were even spoken. Training took over. I hurried forward and helped guide the stretcher into trauma room 3. The child looked impossibly small beneath the white hospital blanket. One of the paramedics read off information while we connected monitors and checked vital signs. Most of it blurred together. What I noticed instead was the boy's hand. He was clutching a small wooden dinosaur so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Something about that detail stayed with me. Even frightened children usually let go eventually. This one never did. The next 20 minutes disappeared into focused concentration. Tests, evaluations, careful observation. Everyone in the room moved with quiet urgency. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, every second mattered. Gradually, the child's condition began to stabilize. Not completely, not enough to relax, but enough for me to finally breathe. I adjusted his blanket and looked down at the dinosaur still trapped in his fingers. "You are doing great," I whispered. "Just keep fighting a little longer." His eyes opened for a moment. Bright green. Scared. Confused. Then they closed again. I stayed beside him longer than necessary. Sometimes patients needed medication. Sometimes they needed reassurance. Sometimes they simply needed another human being nearby. Around 1 in the morning, the automatic doors at the end of the hallway opened. I felt it before I saw it. The atmosphere changed. Conversations lowered. Security personnel straightened. Even experienced doctors glanced toward the entrance. A group of men entered wearing dark tailored suits. They moved with quiet confidence, saying very little. And in the center of them walked a man I had never seen before. Tall, composed, dark hair brushed neatly back. His expression revealed almost nothing. Yet somehow the entire room seemed aware of his presence. He stopped near the nurse's station and looked toward trauma room 3. His eyes never wavered. Someone beside me whispered a name. Luca Moretti. I did not know then that the frightened little boy upstairs was his son. I did not know that my life had just collided with his. I only knew that when those calm green eyes settled on the room where the child lay sleeping, they carried something unexpected. Not power. Not authority. Fear. Most fathers would have rushed into the room immediately. Luca Moretti did not. He stood outside the glass for nearly a minute, watching his son sleep. The hallway lights reflected softly against the window. Rain streaked the darkness beyond the hospital parking lot. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody seemed willing to. I was updating charts when Dr. Reynolds approached him. Their conversation was quiet enough that I could not hear the words, but I noticed something strange. Doctors usually carried themselves with authority. Around Luca, even experienced professionals seemed cautious, respectful, careful, not afraid exactly, just aware. The way people act around someone accustomed to being obeyed. Eventually, Luca entered the room. The other men remained outside. He walked directly to the bedside and sat beside his son without saying a word. The transformation was immediate. The intimidating figure who had frozen an entire hallway suddenly looked like nothing more than a worried father. He brushed a hand gently through the boy's hair. The child stirred. His eyes opened halfway. "Dad," he whispered. Relief crossed Luca's face so quickly I almost missed it. "I am here, buddy." The boy relaxed instantly. His small fingers loosened around the wooden dinosaur for the first time all night. I quietly stepped back toward the monitors, giving them privacy. Moments like that always felt sacred. Hospitals showed people at their most vulnerable. The masks they wore outside rarely survived inside these walls. A few minutes later, the boy fell asleep again. Luca stood and approached the nurse's station. Every conversation nearby seemed to stop. He looked directly at me. Up close, he was somehow even more intimidating. Not because of his size or appearance. It was the focus in his eyes. The sense that when he paid attention to something, nothing else existed. "You are Emma Carter?" he asked. His voice was calm, controlled. I nodded. "Yes. You were with my son when he arrived." "Part of the team, yes." His gaze never left mine. "The doctor said you stayed with him after the emergency was over." I shifted uncomfortably. He was scared. Luca glanced toward the room. He does not trust people easily. Most children do not when they are sick. A corner of his mouth almost moved. Not quite a smile. More like surprise. "You seem unimpressed." The question caught me off guard. Should I be impressed? For a second, silence stretched between us. Then something unexpected happened. One of the men standing behind him looked horrified. Another quickly looked away, as if I had accidentally broken an unwritten rule. Luca, however, seemed amused. "Most people know who I am. I do not spend much time reading business magazines." His eyes narrowed slightly, studying me, measuring something. I suddenly became aware of my wrinkled scrubs, my messy ponytail, and the coffee stain on my sleeve. Not exactly the image of professionalism. "Well," he said finally, "thank you for helping my son. I was doing my job." The answer came automatically. Honest. Simple. It was the same thing I would have said to anyone. But Luca did not respond right away. He just looked at me, as though nobody had ever given him that answer before. Finally, he nodded once. "Good night, Miss Carter." Then he turned and walked away. The men followed instantly. Within seconds, the hallway felt normal again. The pressure disappeared. The strange energy vanished with him. I released a breath I had not realized I was holding. Dr. Reynolds appeared beside me carrying a tablet. "You know who that was, right?" he asked. "Apparently someone important." He laughed quietly. That might be the understatement of the year. I looked back toward Trauma Room 3, where Luca's son slept peacefully beneath a warm blanket. At the time, I thought the night was ending. I thought I would finish my shift, go home, and never see Luca Moretti again. I had absolutely no idea that this was only the beginning. For the next 3 weeks, I did not see Luca Moretti again. Life returned to its usual rhythm of double shifts, overdue bills, and coffee that tasted increasingly like regret. The hospital remained busy. Patients came and went. The city outside kept moving whether any of us were ready or not. Eventually, the strange night blurred into memory. At least, I thought it had. Then the flowers arrived. I found them at the nurse's station just before 7 in the morning. White lilies arranged in an expensive glass vase. No card. No note. Just flowers. Every nurse on the floor immediately assumed they were from a secret admirer. I assumed they had been delivered to the wrong person. By noon, another delivery arrived. This time it was coffee. Not the burnt hospital coffee we all tolerated out of necessity. Real coffee. Fresh. Expensive. Enough for the entire department. The attached note contained only 4 words. "Thank you for helping him." No signature. None was necessary. I stared at the handwriting for a long moment before folding the note and putting it in my pocket. By the end of the week, a third delivery appeared. A donation to the pediatric unit. New equipment. New supplies. Items the hospital administration had been requesting for months. Nobody officially connected it to Luca, but nobody seemed surprised either. The problem was that gratitude from someone like Luca Moretti felt less like a gift and more like a spotlight. I wanted neither. 2 weeks later, I finally saw him again. I was leaving the hospital after a 14-hour shift. Rain drifted through the city in a light mist, coating the sidewalks in silver reflections. My apartment was 6 blocks away. Normally I walked. It saved money. That evening, however, a black SUV was parked across the street. The moment I stepped outside, the driver's door opened. A man in a dark suit approached. Professional. Polite. Completely out of place. "Ms. Carter." I stopped walking. "Can I help you?" He handed me an envelope. "Mr. Moretti asked that I give this to you." My stomach immediately tightened. "Why?" "He said you would ask that question." That was not encouraging. I opened the envelope. Inside was a check. A very large check. Larger than my annual salary. For several seconds, I simply stared at the number. Then I looked back at the driver. Absolutely not. "Ms. Carter." "No." I folded the check and pushed it back toward him. "I did my job. I am not accepting this." The driver looked genuinely uncomfortable. Mr. Moretti anticipated that response as well. Then he should know the answer already. I turned and started walking. The driver hurried after me. "At least let me drive you home." I stopped again. Slowly. "Do I look like I need a chauffeur?" "No, ma'am." "Then tell Mr. Moretti I appreciate the gesture, but I am not for sale." The poor man looked as though I had handed him a live grenade. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I continued down the sidewalk without looking back. The rain cooled my face. Traffic hummed through the city. For the first time all evening, I smiled. What I did not know was that several blocks away, inside another black SUV, Luca Moretti was listening to every word through a speakerphone. And according to the man beside him, my answer made him laugh harder than he had in years. 3 days later, I discovered that saying no to Luca Moretti did not actually make him go away. It only seemed to make him more creative. I arrived at work just before dawn carrying a bagel and the determination to survive another 12-hour shift. The pediatric unit was unusually cheerful. Nurses were smiling. Doctors looked confused in the best possible way. Even the administrator who normally frowned at everyone seemed happy. I found out why 30 minutes later. The donation from the mysterious benefactor had expanded. New monitoring equipment had arrived. Renovations had been approved. A family assistance fund had suddenly appeared to help parents struggling with medical expenses. Nobody officially said Luca's name. Nobody had to. I spent the morning trying very hard not to think about him. Around noon, I failed. A small voice interrupted my charting. "Miss Emma." I looked up. Standing beside the nurse's station was a familiar boy clutching a wooden dinosaur. His green eyes brightened when he saw me. "Ethan." His smile appeared instantly. The sight warmed something inside my chest. Children recovering always felt like a victory. "You remember me." "Of course I remember you." He climbed onto a chair beside me. "Dad said you were stubborn." I nearly dropped my pen. "He said that?" Ethan nodded seriously. He sounded impressed. I laughed before I could stop myself. "That sounds like your father." "He is stubborn too." "That definitely sounds like your father." Ethan seemed pleased by this agreement. For the next 15 minutes, he told me everything about dinosaurs, school, and a science project involving volcanoes. I listened while finishing paperwork. It was surprisingly relaxing. Then I felt it. That strange sensation of being watched. I glanced up. Lucas stood at the far end of the hallway. He was not speaking, not moving, just watching his son laugh for the first time since arriving. The expression on his face stopped me cold. It was not the expression of a powerful man. It was not the expression of someone accustomed to getting his way. It was gratitude, pure and uncomplicated. For a moment, he looked almost exhausted, like someone carrying weight nobody else could see. Ethan followed my gaze and waved enthusiastically. Luca walked over. "I see you have found your favorite nurse again." Ethan grinned. "Miss Emma likes dinosaurs." "That is fortunate." Luca's eyes shifted toward me. "Thank you for spending time with him. He is easy to talk to. Most people find him quiet. Most people do not ask about dinosaurs." The faintest smile touched Luca's mouth. There it was again, that rare expression that completely changed his face. Ethan suddenly stood. "Can we get ice cream?" Luca checked his watch. "It is 43 degrees outside." "That is not a no. You inherited your negotiation skills from someone unfortunate." Ethan laughed. Actual laughter. Bright and genuine. Luca froze for half a second as though he had not heard that sound in a very long time. Then something softened behind his eyes. When Ethan ran ahead toward the elevator, Luca remained standing beside me. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally he said, very quietly, "You have done more for him in a few weeks than some specialists managed in years." I looked toward the elevator where Ethan was waiting. Maybe he just needed someone to listen. Luca followed my gaze. Maybe we both did. The first sign that something had changed came from people I had never met. A week after Ethan's hospital visit, strangers began recognizing me. Not by name. Not exactly. But I noticed the looks. The lingering glances. The quiet conversations that stopped when I entered a room. At first I assumed I was imagining it. New York had a way of making everyone feel watched. Then one Friday evening, my friend Rachel proved otherwise. We were sitting in a small diner 3 blocks from my apartment. The kind of place with cracked leather booths, endless coffee refills, and waitresses who called everyone honey. Rachel was halfway through a cheeseburger when she lowered her voice and asked, "Okay, what is going on?" I blinked. "With what?" "The black SUVs." I nearly choked on my coffee. "The what?" She pointed through the window. Parked across the street sat a dark SUV. Not moving. Not leaving. Just there. My stomach tightened immediately. Maybe somebody is waiting for takeout. Rachel gave me a look. "For 3 hours?" I turned back toward the window. The vehicle remained exactly where it had been when we arrived. That should have worried me. Instead, it annoyed me. Deeply. The next morning, I finally got my answer. I was walking home from a grocery store carrying 2 bags and regretting every life decision that had led me to purchase bottled water on the same trip as canned soup. Halfway up the apartment steps, a familiar voice called my name. I turned around. Lucas stood on the sidewalk wearing a charcoal coat and looking entirely too comfortable in my neighborhood. The sight of him was so unexpected that I almost dropped a bag. "You?" He nodded. "Me?" I glanced down the street. "Are those your SUVs?" Probably. Probably. I own several." I stared at him. He stared back. Neither of us blinked. Finally, I crossed my arms. "Are you having me followed?" "Protected." I did not ask for protection. "No." "Then stop." Luca looked genuinely thoughtful. "That is not likely." I could feel my blood pressure rising. "You cannot just assign security to people because you feel like it." I can. Normal people cannot. That may be true. His calmness somehow made everything worse. I took a slow breath. Luca, Emma, I am serious. So am I. The amusement vanished from his expression. For the first time, his voice carried something heavier. You are important to Ethan. The answer caught me off guard. Completely. That is not a reason to put bodyguards outside my apartment. It is a reason to make certain you are safe. The sincerity in his eyes made it difficult to argue. Not impossible, just difficult. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text message from Rachel appeared. I glanced down and nearly laughed. Is the ridiculously handsome billionaire talking to you right now? I looked up. Luca was watching me. Something funny? No. You smiled. That does not concern you. To my surprise, he smiled too. A real smile this time. Brief, but unmistakable. And for one dangerous second, I forgot that the entire conversation was supposed to be an argument. The next month should have been ordinary. Instead, it became the strangest period of my life. Somehow, without either of us admitting it, Luca Moretti kept finding reasons to appear. Sometimes it was Ethan. Sometimes it was a hospital fundraiser. Sometimes it was a chance encounter that felt suspiciously well organized. The worst part was that I could never prove it. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan convinced me to attend a science exhibit at the Natural History Museum. He had spent an entire week talking about dinosaurs and volcanic eruptions. Saying no felt impossible. I arrived expecting a normal afternoon. Instead, I found Luca waiting near the entrance with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a man who absolutely knew I was annoyed. You planned this, I accused immediately. Ethan looked confused. Luca looked innocent. Neither reaction was convincing. Good afternoon, Emma. That is not an answer. You look tired. Also not an answer. Ethan groaned dramatically. You two argue like grandparents. The look Luca and I exchanged made Ethan laugh so hard that several nearby tourists turned to stare. Somehow that became the pattern. Small moments. Unexpected conversations. Quiet afternoons that slowly stopped feeling unusual. I learned that Luca preferred black coffee and rarely slept more than 5 hours a night. I learned he read history books during flights because fiction felt unrealistic. I learned he carried photographs of Ethan in his wallet and checked on his son more often than most parents check their phones. More importantly, I began seeing the man behind the reputation. The headlines talked about power. The city talked about influence. What I saw was something different. I saw a father who attended every school event he could manage. A man who remembered the names of hospital janitors and security guards. Someone who listened far more than he spoke. One evening, Ethan fell asleep during a charity dinner before dessert even arrived. Luca carried him to the car while I followed behind. The autumn air felt cool against my skin. Streetlights reflected across rain-soaked pavement. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Luca glanced toward his sleeping son. He likes having you around. My heart did something uncomfortable. He is a good kid. You make him happy. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. Luca, he stopped walking. What? I hesitated. The question had lived in my mind for weeks. Why are you really doing this? His expression became thoughtful. Doing what? Spending time with me. Protecting me. Finding excuses to appear everywhere. For several seconds he said nothing. Traffic moved quietly in the distance. Somewhere nearby, music drifted from a restaurant patio. Finally, he looked directly at me. Because when you met me, you were not impressed by my money. I blinked. That is your answer? You were not impressed by my reputation either. That is generally considered a positive character trait. A faint smile appeared, then disappeared. Most people see what I have built. His voice softened. You are one of the few people who simply see me. The words settled heavily between us. I did not know how to respond. Maybe because part of me understood exactly what he meant. And maybe because for the first time since meeting Luca Moretti, I realized I was beginning to look for him too. The first time I realized Luca's world was changing, it was because he stopped smiling. Not often, not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. The small moments disappeared first. The easy conversations. The rare flashes of humor. The relaxed evenings when Ethan would sit between us and explain dinosaur facts as though he were teaching a university lecture. Something was different. I felt it every time my phone buzzed and his replies became shorter. Every time a scheduled lunch turned into a last-minute cancellation. Every time his attention drifted somewhere far beyond the room. One rainy Tuesday evening, I finally stopped pretending not to see it. Ethan was upstairs finishing homework in the penthouse library while Luca and I sat alone on the terrace overlooking Manhattan. The city shimmered beneath low clouds. Headlights traced rivers of light through wet streets. Normally, Luca loved this view. Tonight he barely looked at it. He stood near the railing with a coffee growing cold in his hand. "You have been avoiding me," I said. His eyes shifted toward me immediately. "I have not." That was not convincing. A faint smile appeared and disappeared. "You always know when I am lying. You are getting easier to read. That is concerning." I waited. Eventually he sighed. The sound carried more exhaustion than I had ever heard from him. "There are complications." "Work?" He laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it was obvious. Something like that. The answer irritated me. "Luca, every time you do that, I want to throw something at you." That seems excessive. So does answering every question like a mysterious billionaire in a movie. That earned a genuine smile. Brief, tired, real. Then the smile vanished again. Silence settled between us. Rain tapped gently against the glass behind us. Far below, the city continued moving without caring about either of our problems. Finally, Lucas spoke. "Do you trust me?" The question surprised me. "Yes." His gaze remained fixed on the skyline. "Why?" "Because you have never lied about who you are." He looked at me then. Really looked at me. "Emma." "What?" "If things become difficult for a while, I need you to remember that." A chill moved through me despite the warm coat I was wearing. "What things?" He hesitated. That alone frightened me. Luca Moretti never hesitated. "There are people who think my priorities have changed." I frowned. "Because they have?" The corner of his jaw tightened. That was answer enough. Suddenly dozens of small moments made sense. The interruptions, the meetings, the growing tension around him, the way certain people watched me when they thought I was not paying attention. "This is about me." He did not answer immediately, which was also an answer. My stomach dropped. "Luca, you did nothing wrong." His voice became firmer. "Understand that first. Then why does it feel like I am causing problems?" He stepped closer. Not intimidating, not controlling, just honest. "Because some people believe caring about someone makes you vulnerable." The words landed heavily between us. I stared at him. He stared back. And for the first time since we met, I saw something dangerous in his eyes. Not anger, not fear, determination. The kind that comes after a decision has already been made. I did not know it then, but while we stood on that terrace watching rain fall across Manhattan, powerful people were already demanding that Luca choose between the life he had built and the people he had come to love. And deep down, I think he had already chosen. 2 weeks later, the city woke up to rumors. Newspapers speculated. Business channels debated. People whispered in restaurants, elevators, and office towers. Major partnerships were dissolving. Agreements that had existed for years were ending. Powerful people who once stood beside Luca were suddenly standing somewhere else. I did not understand all the details. I only understood the result. His world was changing exactly the way he had warned me it would. The strange thing was that Luca himself seemed calmer than ever. One cold December evening, I arrived at the penthouse expecting tension and found Ethan building a model volcano. In the living room, the television was off. The security presence felt smaller. The atmosphere felt lighter. Did I miss something? I asked. Ethan grinned. "Dad smiles more now." That was not the answer I expected. Before I could respond, Luca walked into the room carrying 3 mugs of hot chocolate. He handed one to Ethan, one to me, and kept the last for himself. The simple normality of the moment felt surreal. Months earlier, I had known him only as a name people spoke carefully. Now we were standing around a half-finished volcano arguing about whether dinosaurs would have enjoyed modern pizza. Life was strange. Later that evening, after Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch, Luca and I stood near the windows overlooking Manhattan. Snow drifted softly through the darkness. Thousands of lights sparkled below us. The city looked endless. "Do you regret it?" I asked quietly. He looked at me. "Regret what?" "Everything that changed." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he glanced toward the sleeping boy across the room. "When I was younger, I thought success meant building something nobody could take away." His voice remained calm, reflective. "I spent years chasing that idea. And now," a faint smile appeared. "Now I think success is having people worth coming home to." My throat tightened unexpectedly. Outside, snow continued falling across rooftops and streets and bridges. Inside, the silence felt warm. Safe. Honest. You know, I said. Most people would probably call that a very expensive lesson. Luca laughed softly. Most people would be correct. I looked down at the city. Then was it worth it? He did not hesitate. Not even for a second. Yes. The certainty in his answer stole my breath. Not because it sounded dramatic. Not because it sounded romantic. Because it sounded true. Completely true. The next morning, months after that first terrifying night in the hospital, I watched Ethan race through the apartment carrying his wooden dinosaur while Luca chased after him with mock frustration. Sunlight poured through the windows. Coffee filled the air. Laughter echoed through rooms that once felt far too large. And suddenly I understood something that had taken both of us a very long time to learn. Some people spend their lives trying to rule the world. Others discover that the world was never what mattered. Sometimes the greatest victory is not keeping everything. Sometimes it is knowing exactly what you are willing to lose. And as I stood there watching the family we had somehow become, I realized that neither of us had lost anything important at all.